As I said previously, there's a relatively large number of economic activities going on including arts and drawing, that is not considered to be relevant in terms of employment, unemployment. And we have as well, I say this for a special reason, kind of difficulty when it comes to working age population. On the one hand, it's very clear. There is a general definition applying usually nationwide. So you would have, let's say, a retirement age of 65. And then you have these funny jobs. I don't know how it is today, but pilots. For a long time, I remember in Europe, there was the retirement age of 65, and pilots retired with 50. Still, you would say working age population is 65. These people are officially retired, so they fall out of the system, although they are not 65, but they are officially retired. The reason is simply because the job is so straining, the responsibility is, they say, so large that they don't keep them in the job longer. You don't have to agree with these definitions, but it's simply the case. Now, this is the one thing, why it is important. The other thing is that we see currently a shift, a change, kind of globally, and I say kind of because it's, of course, not really in all countries, but in many countries you find an extension, again, of the working age. So we have had over the last decades, plural, general trend of lowering the retirement age, from which had been a standard of 65 down to 60. Usually different from a difference, there is a difference between female and male retirement age. So lowering of age, and now you have the opposite trend that it is extended again. So it's going up to 65 again, then to 66, 67, 68. I don't know where it will go and how long it will take. And the main reason, I would not say the only reason, but the main reason for it is, of course, the economic reason, that the resources are considered to be limited. You have a link to demographic factors there. There are more and more people reaching retirement age, and there are less and less people paying into the system due to unemployment, due to longer times in education, and others. So what you have then is you simply don't have enough money paid into the old age pension systems, but they say it's not necessarily justified, but if we extend the working age, people don't, A, they contribute for a longer time, and B, they take out of the system as well for not as well, but for a limited time, shorter time. So you have these two trends being used as justification. Now this is the main argument There is another argument sometimes brought forward as a political argument, sometimes being brought as well forward by people reaching this age, that they say, but we want to work longer. With, let's say, 65, I don't feel that I shouldn't work anymore. I like my work. It is some kind of satisfaction. It as well, it's a factor to stay in touch with others. So I want to work longer, and it's not possible if the retirement age is defined specifically. And this is then as well a kind of push effect towards increasing retirement age. There you would have these two terms of pull effects and push effects. One side pushes, the other side pulls. The side that doesn't have money pulls you to maintain, to stay in employment. The other side pushes, I want to stay there. And whatever the outcome is as well an outcome of political negotiations. As I said, it's a little bit a general, a kind of global trend. There are demographic factors. There are as well factors of values, of changing values. There are basically the economic factors. And it is a matter of qualification. That simply the conditions for staying in employment changed. That much of the work we do today is not as training, at least physically not as training as it had been before. So sitting at the computer or even repairing cars today is not as physically straining as it had been. So this is the one thing that it is important to keep in mind what it actually means when we talk about being employed, being not employed, and in which way we are not active. Simply to know what is officially behind it. And then there's another thing in terms of income. Now we are coming to inequality. For many people, they want to stay in the job because they like it. The other factor is, of course, it is the source of income. And there's a huge difference, and I won't go into the into details of the entire inequality discussion. It's on the one hand, it's more a sociological discussion of what and how do you define inequality. And at the same time, it is very much a definition, not a definitional question, but it is a matter of using different figures. And all these figures are somewhat problematic, not least when it comes to international comparisons, because you don't have one standard. Standards as well change over time. Still, it is somewhat interesting to look at what it means when it comes to sources of income by income group. The bottom 80%, so you have different groups of income groups, of the height of the income. So 5 income groups. The bottom, meaning those, the fifth with the lowest income, depend to 80% of income from work. from employment, wages and salaries. Again, this does not include income in kind, meaning DIY, possibly informal work. Wages and salaries as official income for being employed makes up 80% of those who are at the bottom of the income. And then you have, on the other hand, the top earners, 0.1%, you can say in one way they don't really have to work because they get a major part of their income actually from other sources, meaning from dividends and capital gains. Capital gains, dividends, basically means if you have money, you get income from the money. It's not your labor, it's not your work, but it is what commonly is expressed as let the money work for you. Let the money work for you is meaning what is the red here is coming out of the blue here. It's not coming out of the blue, as we say in English. It's coming. Something comes out of the blue. It makes sense here. It comes out of the blue, meaning the labor of others. There's only a very small amount of dividends and capital gains. And then there is something, if you followed at least the global discussions, political debates, there was, I don't know how many years ago, this slogan, the 1% Wall Street disputes, the 1%, the 99% of the population. And here you see at least that this top 1% is really a relevant figure in terms of income. This is figures for the United States of America, 1996 and 2006. What is important as well, that you have a huge process of redistribution going on. So in the higher ranks, higher income ranks, this part, dividends and capital gains, increased. In simple terms, capitalists getting richer. Here, this typical thing applies even more, the saying of, from honest work, nobody gets rich. And this is increasingly the case, meaning you get less and less money out of your work. The bottom up is, the bottom is basically remaining on the same level. Then you have already the top 20, it's decreasing substantially, by minus 16%, even more decreasing the top 5. And there it's the highest, no, it's top 1, then the highest decrease, minus 24%, and then it's going a little bit back to the to the other side. So these are relevant figures, these are relevant differences. It's not just a small amount, small difference. Over only 10 years. And by and large, as far as I know, it went on then in the following 10 years up to 2016. There's in the last year or so, there's a slight change turning the curve, but it's only a slight change. As I said, bottom 99 and top 1% is a relevant figure. And you see here the figures for the population. Again, quite impressive if you look at the overall development. These are basically figures of inequality, meaning all this wealth production, overall wealth production, it is getting better. The economies grow, have this kind of side effect, if you want, of an increasing inequality as well. Of course, you can leave it as it is, or you can say it is a matter of political interest, and as such it is something where we have to intervene. We have to work against it. Then looking at subgroups, income distribution. As I said, I don't want to go into all the details, because not least these figures don't say really much about all the details behind it, but you have as well huge difference between countries. And you can say there are countries that are structurally different. So China with a large sector of SOEs, with a strong political control of economic processes. Russia as a kind of radical marketization development. So they really pushed hard of free market, what occasionally is called Manchester capitalism. Just leave it go without any regulation, without any intervention. And then you have South Africa is still called what is called traditional development state. Problematic term, but this is what you find there. Coming really from this extreme apartheid. And then you have countries, now Switzerland is always a funny little fellow there. But then you have the states of the same group, which is here France and Denmark. So you would have Switzerland, France, and Denmark as European countries, France and Denmark as EU countries, and Switzerland, as I said, is a little bit a funny outsider. Policies matter. But actually it is not policies matter, but it is politics matter. Property structures, regulation, political economy. This is what matters here. It's not the individual political measures of redistributing money. It is the overall productive system. What do we understand, or how do we understand the political regulative system? So always keep this in mind when you talk about economics as well. Whatever we do there, in the overall framework, is relevant in terms of as well inequality. Just a side remark on methods. I think most, you can say most of the studies, you would have these 5 groups. Sometimes you work with deciles, meaning 10 groups. This is somewhat a general agreement that makes figures as well a little bit more comparable. Just to make you aware of it, the definitions, if they are not for one country, are again problematic because the offices, the national statistical offices, work with sometimes different definitions and different calculations. Tax revenue is hugely important and interesting. As well, if you look at political economy, but as well as at economics. Who depends on income? Who defines income? And how do tax conditions actually define the performance, what you can do, what you are able to do with an enterprise? So in the ideal case, and I'm not joking now, these are real cases as well, you have corporate tax of more or less nothing. And I'm talking now not about 9%, but even less. I talked earlier about individual taxes depending on income. This would be more or less the individual taxes here in terms of what you pay as being employed. And you then have consumption tax, wherever everybody independent of income, independent of job, pays the same. Even if you don't have any income, you pay these taxes as long or as soon as you are consuming. This is what you pay in the shop. And in some cases it is substantial. Most of the price is defined by the consumption tax. Petrol, I don't know here in China now, tobacco usually has a high rate of tax. And there you see a kind of funny detail that the state always say, we charge you taxes because we want to make smoking expensive as a kind of health policy. But instead of saying we make it so high that really nobody smokes anymore, or we prohibit smoking, we at least take the money and gain from it. Another sources of income again, it's again United States. So salaries and wages are really the major part of the entire value production, value generation. And I say this in this way now, explicitly, even if it's not concrete, not entirely correct in this context, but I say it in this context using this term because it is really the creation of value in all our societies is coming from labor. It is true in terms of the production, of the price of products, or of the value of products, and it is true in terms of the overall value in societies. And there you find a huge contradiction when it comes to privatization, here you see an additional meaning of what privatization means. You pay privately taxes, and what is done with the taxes is increasingly privatized. Private roads, private hospitals, private schools, private education in general, everything private. So it is not only about making profit out of private enterprises, but it is as well gaining from what is actually paid for by the majority, meaning as public taxes coming from the wage earners. Interest dividends, a small part, business net income, less loss, and net capital gain, less loss. I don't know if this is in detail coming up in another course. We don't have to talk about it in detail here. But in a way, you can be cynical and say this is about the real, the honest income for entrepreneurship. Then we talked about inequality in another context. You know this already, Maslow pyramid. The effect of inner income inequality is visible here again. Because for the lower income groups, you have exactly this pattern, that they pay the largest part of their income, percentage, the largest part of the income for the basic needs. So even if you have your palace for 1 million, and compare this with your hut for, I don't know, 1,000, the 1,000 make up for more of your total income than the 1 million for the larger. So it's not the absolute amount you pay, but the amount you pay for basic needs from your overall income. The absolute amount you spend is increasing here when you are getting richer. You pay more for housing, you pay more for nutrition, because you buy not necessarily more, you buy more as well, but you buy as well the better quality. But it is as well the relative issue that is of relevance, that actually you pay less when it comes to your overall income. And there you have this, what you know already from a previous lecture, where we have this overall shift from the poverty line and airline to the wash line, that you have, of course, an overall increasing living standard, this what we called previously the historical moral element, that more and more people are actually able to avail of certain standards which didn't even exist many years ago, depending on what many years ago means. It can be 10 years, it can be 50 years, it can be 100 years. But still there was a difference between how did you manage to wash. If you had been very rich, it was not a matter of washing machine or doing it yourself, hand washing. but it was having a servant who did it for you, or versus the other part, washing yourself. Those who could not afford a servant had to do it themselves. So this is an important part in terms of inequality as well, that you have different dimensions of it. When it comes to poverty research, which is part of economics as well, although to a limited extent, if it comes to this, you have this pattern of the term of absolute poverty and relative poverty. Absolute poverty simply means you do not have sufficient means to survive. I think it's now the $2, internationally the $2 line. That in several of these so-called developing countries, people live from $1 or $2 now, and they can survive. And saying they can survive is not more than survival. You have a huge amount of starvation. You are not talking about education in terms of school education or anything like this, but you are talking simply about surviving. Then you have, of course, public programs, sometimes international programs of aid, international aid, of bringing people resources, but as well education, even if they cannot afford it. The countries cannot afford them. And then you have the relative poverty, which means you cannot live up to the moral standards, historical moral standards of a given society. If you cannot afford education to the level of reading, basic reading and writing, you would be considered as being relatively poor. If you cannot afford a certain standard of nutrition, you would be considered as being relatively poor. I did this for some time. I don't know anymore how it is defined now, but it would be, for instance, one warm meal per day, or one warm meal per week, would be some measurement of relative poverty. If you have in a certain society one warm meal per day, this is the standard. If you cannot afford it, if you cannot afford it, then you are considered to be poor, relatively poor. Meat, I don't know how much meat is considered to be a standard. Again, it's about being able to afford it. If you are too lazy to have your warm meal per day, or if you are vegetarian, this is not about relative poverty. If you cannot afford it, that is considered to be living in relative poverty. Similar standards, or there are standards as well in terms of accommodation. How much space do you have for accommodation per person? What is the quality in terms of hygienic conditions, water, hot and warm water? Standards depending on the society, and of course this is something as well, and there you make the link back, this is something as well which brings you, or which is part of the explanation of so-called low-income countries. If it is considered to be normal to live in only one room with a family, then your income is by definition, or can be by definition be lower than if it is considered to have one room per person, per family, as the standard. Food, whatsoever, you take it. So this defines as well, to a large extent, what we understand then as low-income, high-income countries. Education. And education, I mentioned health as well, as somewhat a social standard. It's not private education, but here the society provides a certain education in terms of public education. And then you have the shifts. I started this part of the lecture with showing as well something of the regulated system, of having a regulated system or a legal system that basically sets the rule in negative terms, allowing you basically pushing the standard down. Having a moral standard and adapting the moral and legal standard to the economic wants or aims you have. Here you have the general thing of all human societies are regulated by law. Law is a statement of societal consensus backed by the power of authority. It is both embedding of politics and the economy in society, and at the same time embedded therein. Remember Polanyi? Polanyi is saying the economy is taken out of society. Meaning it is not about distribution, direct distribution, exchange of mutual control, people interacting directly with each other, but it is now the economic law of gain. But at the same time, you still have the societal control of control by a legal system. You'll have next semester a little bit of law considering this, and this is in place as matter of more or less strict regulation by law. It begins with defining what is property, what are you allowed to do with your property, as well what are the obligations if you have property. It is about the law of labor contracts, and it is about law as well around inequality. How much inequality is allowed? As I said, read the papers. Every day you find the entire economy in it. There is now a debate here in China. We have this debate on the government, actually the CAS, in a report saying we have a problem in the housing market now, accommodation, and we have to stop, we have to be careful when it comes to speculation. Because much of the living space, accommodation, is not used by people for themselves, but it is bought for speculation. So CAS says, in a kind of official report, We have to stop this. We have to control speculation, because otherwise, and this is the point, otherwise we have an increasing gap between those who can and those who cannot afford accommodation. Summing up, in some way, because we are coming after this now to preparing, as I said in the announcement, the exams. In a way, summing up the theories behind what we had been talking about, we have the two strands. The one is political economy, and in the wider sense, economy that is based on the theory of labor, of value. Labor of value. Here we have in the center as the second strand, marginalism. In the beginning, second half of the 19th century, emerging, and this is what I said today, it is the subjective valuation. What is happening on the market? On the market we define prices, we define not only prices, but we define value. Here it is defined by, as well by Smith actually, political economy of Smith, Ricardo, all these, defining value as matter of the time spent, as the matter of how much does it cost to produce something. Subjective value theories in terms of marginalism. And then we have only later developing something of, okay, marginalism is fine. Subjective value is fine. But there is social choice. But there is behavior. People behave not only as rational beings. In the strict sense here, they would behave rationally, but they don't. And then we have institutions. Institutions matter. This all changes a little bit the focus of marginalism. Saying still, it happens on the market, but there is something more to it. And with this, you have, of course, something that is relevant as well then in terms of regulation. Marginalism, in the strictest sense, in this way you can say even Smith was marginalist, says leave it to the market. The market will manage, the market will regulate itself. Laissez-faire. Let it be. Let it work in its own way. But if you acknowledge the meaning of institutions, you have to regulate institutions. If you acknowledge behavior, you would have acknowledged as well there is some limitation that you are not allowed to do business with underaged people, with children. Protect them. Don't allow a child to invest 1 million, because you can be sure the child doesn't have it, or the child has it, but doesn't know what it does with it. And then you have more differentiated systems coming out of it in terms of heterodox economics. Keynesianism would go there, for instance, that says, okay, leave it to the market, but there is a crisis and there is state intervention necessary, but you would have as well differences of marginalism, and you have as well then here the entire system of world systems, saying it's not only the national economy, but it is a world system, and we have to consider this and look at comparative advantages, global competition, and all these issues.